And welcome back to Sports Talk. Doug Miles along with Don Henderson tonight as we come to you on a Monday evening, kind of a thunderstorm Monday evening. I'm down here in Sarasota, but Don up in New Jersey, where I understand it's been nice weather up there. You had a good Father's Day up there, Don, and also want to wish you a happy birthday. So a nice weekend for you, huh?
Well, thank you very much. And the professor will tell you the same thing. Yesterday and today are spectacular. Saturday, if you watch the golf tournament at all, you know, it was one of the worst days. They said it was worse than playing in Ireland or England or anywhere else. So we're lucky we got great weather now, and the professor is ready to tell us all about Steve Carlton and Tim McCarver.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a great baseball book, and again from our friends at the University of Nebraska Press. And this one is called Lefty and Tim, How Steve Carlton and Tim McCarver Became Baseball's Best Battery. And for people not aware, and Bill, maybe you're not aware, Tim McCarver has been with us several times on our shows over the years, Bill, because he lives part of the year, as you know, down here in Sarasota. So when we saw that book was available, we wanted to have you on and talk about one of our friends. And, of course, Don worked for the Phillies for many years. He knew them both quite well. So, first of all, welcome to the show, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I mean, it's really nice to reconnect. I do remember Don's time here. I connect him with WIP Sports Talk Radio, but I do remember that he, did Temple basketball and was involved with the Phillies for a while, too.
Yeah, we were at CAU at that particular time. Of course, Lee Thomas was the general manager. We did the general manager shows, the pre- and post-game shows for the Phillies, and then a talk show, of course, from 10 o'clock or 9:30 until midnight, or at the end of the game until midnight. So worked with the Phillies for the better part of 25 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Bill, I know you've written a couple other books as well. You talked about previously for Nebraska Press on baseball, so obviously you're a big baseball fan. Just give a little brief background of where you're from. I know you're up from the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, but as far as baseball goes.
Yeah, I mean, my first year following baseball was 1964. You know the story.
Oh.
The Bills were up by 6.5 games with 12 left to play. They dropped 10 in a row to gift wrap the NL pennant for the St. Louis Cardinals. And it kind of went downhill from there until the late 1970s and 1980 when the organization took its first world championship. So that's pretty much my story in a nutshell. As far as playing is concerned, the game tells you when it has no use for you as a player anymore, so you find other things to do, and it told me in college. So I started writing about it because it is a passion of mine.
How did you get the association? Not so much with Timmy, because he's pretty forthcoming and does radio and television still. Until a year or so ago, he did the TV show, which was syndicated all around the country. But how much contact and information did you get from Steve Carlton personally?
Off the record, a lot. On the record, I couldn't write anything. That's Carlton. I mean, that's Carlton. The first time I wrote a book, back in 2008 called Almost a Dynasty. University of Pennsylvania Press published that book. And just a few years before, the Phillies were celebrating the 20th anniversary of their lone, at that time, world championship. And they had a big get-together in Atlantic City, and all of them were there. And I just got myself a room, and they were coming in and out, and I got all the interviews I wanted. And then it was Carlton's turn to be interviewed, and he walks in, and he says, it's been 20 years. He says it's time to restart the no talking policy. He turned around and walked out. And, I figured, Larry Christensen wrote the foreword to this book. Larry's a neighbor of mine, and the book is actually dedicated to him. And he was the guy that convinced me that if I was going to do a biography of Carlton, it would be incomplete without a dual biography, really, of Tim McCarver. And I'm glad he suggested that, because LC tried 6 ways to Tuesday to get Lefty to talk to me, and he just wouldn't. But Tim was great. I mean, Tim gave me hours of his time, and I had known him, and I'd done a couple interviews with him years earlier. So as most writers do, you get more information than you're going to use and come back to it. So I had more than enough material on Tim.
McCarver really associated, and you talk about it in the book, not only with Carlton, his personal catcher for several years with the Phillies, but, of course, going back, you mentioned 64 with the Cardinals winning the World Series against the Yankees then, and then again in 67. But McCarver and Bob Gibson were really a great battery for several years. So he really, obviously one of the all-time great defensive catchers, and not a bad hitter as well. People tend to forget 2 World Series. He had great hitting World Series. So interesting man, isn't he?
Yes, he is, and I'm glad you brought that up because I always felt that Tim was shortchanged in terms of his playing career. In 1964, the World Series, of course, Gibby was the MVP, but it could have just as easily gone to Tim for that World Series. I think, unfortunately, Tim came around or came just before what became the prototypical catchers, who were power hitting catchers, Johnny Bench, Carlton Fisk, people like that. And Tim was not a power hitter. I mean, he hit for average, but he was every bit as good defensively as those other catchers. In fact, in terms of pitch calling, I think he was better.
He also still holds the record for the most triples by a catcher, and
right.
Was one of the sidebars, if you have a chance to talk to Tim, that he is really proud of. He talks about it a lot about the fact that he's in a very select group there, just one.
Yep, that's true. That is true. I was a bit too quick by saying that he really wasn't a power hitter. He did hit for average.
But he could run. That was the big thing.
Exactly. That's what I was just about to say. He could run. And for a catcher, that was exceptional.
So now you get all the information from Timmy, and you get very little information from Steve Carlton, and yet Tim will tell you himself that his 2 best friends in all of baseball, in fact, in life really, were Bob Gibson and Steve Carlton. They are still very, very, the 3 of them were very, very close. Of course, Bob Gibson passed away, but very, very difficult to get information from Steve Carlton. I wonder, exactly which direction you went there.
Well, what I had to do was talk to teammates, both from the Cardinals and primarily from the Phillies, about Lefty, and then count on the few contemporary newspaper quotes that existed from pretty much about 1975 on. He did talk to the press. People don't understand that his no-talking policy was evolved. It was gradual. And it came about because of a journalist by the name of Bill Conlon of the Philadelphia Daily News, who in 1973, and Don, I know you remember him, 1973, Lefty, according to Conlon, came to spring training camp out of shape. Well, truth was he had bronchitis, and it took him longer to get in shape. But he had a reversal of fortune as a result of those things in 1973, and where he went 27-10 in 72 and had that first Cy Young season, he went 13-20 in 1973. And all the way, Conlon was just criticizing him all the time, selective quotation, excoriating him in the press if he had a bad outing. So 74 comes around, and Carlton says, I'll talk to anybody in the press except Bill Conlon. And he accepted. I mean, Conlon kind of accepted him. He knew it was coming. And then Stan Hochman started in on him. And then it was, well, I'll talk to anybody except those guys on the Daily News. And then he reached a truce with Stan Hochman. As it turns out, Stan Hochman gave Carlton the very last interview, and I guess it was September of 1979, before he completely stopped talking to the press. So that policy evolved.
Billy?
I'm going to let you take that down. You and I were talking about Stan Hochman the other day, so you take it from there. You knew Stan better than I didn't know him at all. So
yeah, I worked with Stan on the Philadelphia 76ers on Prism. He was my color analyst for a couple of years, along with number 3T. and Freddie Carter. But we did the games together, and of course he worked on Channel 6, the ABC station, on the weekends, Stan Hochman, and he was a columnist for the Daily News. Bill Conlon, unfortunately, troubles outside of the area of baseball and writing, but was really one of the foremost and most respected baseball writers for years and years and years, not only for the Daily News, but working himself up from Penn State University. And but it just got to be a controversy between, the two gentlemen could not come together, and Bill was writing what he thought was, and the Phillies got very upset about it too. They weren't happy about what he wrote a lot of the times, but that's his job. I mean, his job was to write what he thought was the best information to give them the readers, and of course, a lot of people disagree with that, and obviously, certainly Steve Carlton did, because he was having a tough year.
Absolutely. I guess I'm in a minority of one, because Stan Hochman is beloved in Philadelphia, and Conlon, although not really liked, highly respected. Frankly, I don't respect Bill Conlon, never did at all, and I had problems with Stan Hochman, and all that flows from a book that I wrote in 2004, which was titled September Swoon, Richie Allen, the 64 Phillies, and Racial Integration. And for years writing that book, I tried to get, in every means I could, email, phone calls, even going to the Daily News building and trying to meet with both those guys. And they would never return calls. So, what did I have left? I had their columns. And both those guys, they used the issue of race to blow that team apart. It wasn't Allen, it was them. And and they did this from 1965 on, after Thomas and a white veteran by the name of Frank Thomas got into a fist fight at home plate. And then the Phillies released Frank Thomas. Thomas went on the air, WIP radio, bad-mouthed Allen, and the fans just never forgave him. But those two, Conlon, Hochman, and another writer by the name of Larry Merchant, all three from the Philadelphia Daily News, they were the ones that kept on harping on this issue of racism and accusing Allen of manipulating that to his own advantage, when in fact it was not. It was those three. And why did they do it? Because, like other chipmunk writers, starting with Dick Young of the New York Daily News, they became very intrusive in the personal lives of the players, and had to, because, with the advent of television, you didn't need to write about what was going on in the game anymore. People could see it. So they, that was their way of entertainment, and to them, they were saying that, the fans have to have a liaison between, themselves and the players, and we're the guys that keep them honest. That's garbage. And Hochman, when the book came out, he started following me around all over Philadelphia on a speaking tour, and trying to embarrass me. And I said, Stan, I tried to reach you. I would have loved to interview you for this book, but you didn't return any of my calls. And then he finally stopped. Conlon wouldn't talk to me until 2008. And then he invited me to his house in New Jersey, gave me a very nice lunch, plied me with all kinds of information about the Phillies that I simply couldn't write. It was all off-field stuff. And, and their behavior, which I simply couldn't write. I mean, I don't know why I did that. Maybe thought I was naive enough where I was going to write it. And then the book comes out. I sent him a copy to thank him, and he said, this book is crap. And he says, you know what? You're a terrible writer, and I'm going to make it my aim to destroy you. So, Bill Conlon, I have no respect for it. And, it's kind of poetic justice what happened to him. But Hochman, I just never understood. I could understand later on, why people embraced him. And in fact, I think he did his mea culpa by really trying to support a group of little leaguers called the Anderson Monarchs, raised money for that organization. And I think he did his mea culpa that way. But you look at his articles, I mean, they are caustically accusatory about Allen as manipulating racism. And it just wasn't fair. It just wasn't fair.
Yeah, he was a big part of the baseball writers on every Sunday morning on the show, and he was a big part of that because he was considered and was until, unfortunately, the end of the line for him. He was still considered one of the best baseball writers in the country at that particular time, and he was a big part of that show. But you're right. I mean, he was very, 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 very difficult to understand at times. But I'll tell you, one of the best writers that the Philadelphia Daily News ever put together. And Hochman, on the other hand, was, he was a columnist, so it was a different story with Hochman.
Right. Well, columnists, by definition, have to kind of stir the pot because they are, that's pure opinion. Although I will say the writer that I have, who I feel is, at least for me, and I think for most Philadelphians now, and he hasn't written quite some time. He worked for NFL Films, and then he was on the Eagles postgame. He just retired as Ray Didinger, and I thought his stuff was every bit as good as either of those guys. And of course, Ray is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Absolutely, he just got the Burt Bell Award as well. So
right.
He's in a class by himself.
Yep.
The other thing is that, just from a sidebar standpoint, at the end of the World Series, at the end of I walked over. Timmy was doing the game on national TV, and I was in the booth right next to him. And I walked over when the game was over, and I said, "Timmy, how about coming on with us for a little bit for the post-game show?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, fine, no problem." So he came over, and as we're doing the show, Steve Carlton was up in the doorway. And he waved up to Steve Carlton to come down. And I think the last interview of that type I did that night after the World Series because he and Steve Carlton and Tim McCarver sat together, and we just talked about the World Series and about his slider and about their. And I don't think he's ever. I don't know, but I don't think he ever did another interview after that. And he was on with us for about 15 minutes. And you would never think he had never talked to anybody for 10 years.
What year was that?
Right after the World Series.
93?
1980.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, here's. I'm glad you brought that up. That's interesting because, as I mentioned in the book, Tim in 1980 got his start in broadcasting with the Phillies broadcast team.
Right.
And both Lefty and him felt, look, it wouldn't be fair because of their friendship if Tim was always getting the exclusive interview with him. So that just didn't happen. Now, I do think after the World Series, he did get one interview. Now, of course, in more recent times, and we're talking about, the 2000s, whenever they went to St. Louis, for example, and were up in the broadcast booth, I know, that Tim and Lefty had, I wouldn't call it an interview, but a nice running discussion because a couple of those are on YouTube. And, that yielded a lot of information. And in fact, a lot of quotations that I got came off those YouTube tapes, so thank God for those. But, I really do believe that Tim McCarver was, for me, the best baseball broadcaster that I ever heard. Now, obviously, there's Vin Scully, Red Barber, who I wasn't around to hear, but I heard Vin Scully, the Bucks. But I learned so much baseball from Tim McCarver listening to him. And the other thing I liked about him, he was candid. And I will admit that he was a hero for me twice over. First as a kid because I was a catcher, and then later on as a broadcaster. And I, for many years, did a baseball podcast here in Philadelphia, and it was about the Phillies, and they weren't too happy with it because I was every bit as candid as Tim was. in my remarks. But, I think you have to be. I mean, that's a matter of personal integrity. And people don't want a homer. They really don't. They want to hear an educated perspective on the team, on the players, on the game. And McCarver gave that.
Well, I can't disagree with that. Doug, go ahead.
Talking with Bill Kashatus, and let me just reset the title of the book again, Lefty and Tim, How Steve Carlton and Tim McCarver Became Baseball's Best Battery. And, Bill, just kind of going back a little bit, what we were talking about before, the columnists that, poking into the players' private lives. I grew up in New York. Don was, of course, more Philadelphia, but I grew up and kind of like the tail end of the Dick Young era, and he's the guy that Tom Seaver basically left New York because of a couple columns Dick Young wrote back in '77, I guess it was. So, we had our share of those in New York.
I heard that. Well, Dick Young is, I guess, considered the father of the Chipmunk writers, and, I know that he wrote the foreword to Conlon's book, Batting Cleanup, Bill Conlon. So, I understand that, and New York is clearly, I think, the toughest market to play in. Although people, and Don might disagree with me on this, but I think the silent majority of Philadelphia fans are silent, and they're knowledgeable baseball people. Unfortunately, the small minority of boo birds are the ones that get the national reputation for us, and it's really a shame. And our press, frankly, deserve them. So it's changed. I mean, the press is nowhere near as hypercritical as they were. It was pretty much in baseball, and that does.
You almost wait a minute, Bill. You almost have no press left. That's why.
Yeah.
There's nobody to compete with. Bill Conlon had to compete with the Inquirer and the Bulletin. And,
right.
So did Ray Kelly and so forth. And Ray Dininger when he worked for the Bulletin. You're talking about competition between papers. And now you don't get any competition because what you see in the Daily News, you see in the Inquirer, same thing.
It's the same syndicate. You're right. And I'll tell you something else. Just like the major leagues have bought out the minor leagues and have their own minor league organizations, the Phillies are trying to control their own media relations by having their own former players do podcasts. There's one
right.
that started. It's Jimmy Rollins and Ron Darling, covering the game. But John Kruk has his podcast. There's some other players, former players that get on that podcast, and those are the news feeds now. So it's not like it was. And you're right. I mean, it was more colorful, definitely more lively when there were multiple papers in this city that competed against each other.
Doug?
Bill, just want to talk a little bit about Steve Carlton's pitching style, and you go into that book quite well. I remember him coming up when I started watching baseball, I guess early 70s, with the tail end of the Cardinals, and then, of course, with the Phillies, and just that powerful kind of overhand delivery style, and just talk a little bit about his style of pitching, which you really don't see any lefties that pitch even close to the way he does now.
You're right. The first part of that book is really a story about Carlton McCarver and Bob Gibson, because Gibson had such a tremendous impact on both of their careers. Now, clearly there was an age difference between McCarver and Gibson. So Gibson kind of, I won't say mentored, but put Timmy in his place, when he was coming up on everything from race relations to, not bothering him in his office, which
right.
is how he would. And McCarver would come out, and Gibson would say to him, "What the hell are you doing back here? The only thing you know about hitting is that you can't do it. Get your ass behind the plate." So now McCarver and Carlton, there was a slight age difference, but they were more contemporaries and more friends, I think, then, although Gibson and McCarver did become friends. In terms of Gibson's influence on Carlton, I found very interesting because not only did Gibson teach Carlton the slider, which he did on a off-season trip to Japan. I guess it was in 1967 or 68. But many of Gibson's idiosyncrasies, throwing inside, dare I say, headhunting, no talking or talking very little to the press, not being disturbed by any of your teammates, even if it's a catcher on the mound, not giving up the ball when the manager comes to take it. All those things Carlton learned from Gibson. And
don't forget, Bill, that they also had the confrontation between the catching itself, because Bob Boone was really the primary catcher for the Phillies, and of course McCarver caught for the Phillies. Then he went to Boston, and he came back, and there was always a controversy as why would they put McCarver in, and there was a little confrontation between Boone and McCarver as to why they would be catching.
Right. Well, no, absolutely. And one thing that strikes me as very curious is that, Carlton and McCarver reached an understanding by 1969 when they were together with the Cardinals. And McCarver, who had always insisted on calling the pitches himself, and Carlton, who insisted on throwing what he wanted to, finally came together and they mapped out a plan. Now, Boone did not have that insistence and treated, I think, and especially as his rookie year, 1973, treated Carlton with that kind of respect. But for whatever reason, Carlton blamed his down year on Boone, and it never got better. And that's why in 1975, after the Boston Red Sox released Tim came down to Philadelphia, and he was looking for a broadcasting job. And Paul Owens, the general manager of the Phillies at that time, called him in and said, well, Tim, we don't have a broadcasting job, but we have a need for a backup catcher and a pinch hitter, and you can still play. So McCarver signed on. He caught Carlton in a handful of games. It worked. In 1976, Johnny Oates, who they had acquired from Atlanta, gets hurt on opening day, and Carlton doesn't want to throw to Boone anymore. McCarver finds himself as Carlton's personal catcher. And the rest is history from 76 to 79. And while I have this opening, let me just point out that Carlton made 709 starts over the course of his 24-year MLB career, and McCarver caught 228 of them. That's 32% of them. But between 76 and 79, Carlton made 140 starts, and McCarver caught 128. That's 91% of them. And at one point, McCarver caught Carlton in 90 straight starts, and Carlton went 48 and 26 overall with the Phillies. And that is not only 1976 to 1979, but also 75 and the first half of 72. When Carlton pitched and McCarver caught, Carlton was 81 and 45. Wow. And that battery, these are unbelievable numbers. I mean, one of the reasons Elsie was right about doing a dual biography is, and I didn't realize this until I crunched the numbers, I did not know how good they were. In terms of starts, that battery of Carlton McCarver with those 128 games together, in terms of starts, they are, I guess they are 16th all-time all-time. And in terms of, they're 20th all-time. And in terms of wins, Carlton McCarver had 120 victories, which ranked 16th all-time. So these guys were unbelievable together. Unbelievable. And, we're talking about batteries here that, Mickey Lolich and Bill Freehand of the Tigers, Warren Spahn and Del Crandall of the Milwaukee Brewers. These are, batteries that were very exceptional. And Carlton and McCarver were, right up there with them.
Well, Bill, best of luck with the book. I tell you, you've done a nice job on our show, and I'll let Doug wind it up. But I just want to thank you very much for coming on, spending so much time with us, and best of luck with it. I'll look forward to getting a chance to read it myself.
Thanks, Don.
Just one more time, the title, Lefty and Tim, How Steve Carlton and Tim McCarver Became Baseball's Best Battery, and it's published by University of Nebraska Press. And, Bill, I guess that's the place they can go, people can go, or is it available everywhere?
Well, it's available in all Barnes & Noble stores. I know that.
All right.
'Cause I'm doing a bunch of signings at Barnes & Nobles. Haven't been down there yet, but, it is. It's available online, on Amazon. It's available at University Press of Nebraska, and it should be at all the Barnes & Noble stores.
Great. Bill, real pleasure talking to you. I know you probably have another one in the works, so please keep in touch. I know we have our emails, so let us know when that comes out. We'd love to have you back on.
Thanks a lot, Doug. Appreciate it.
Take care. Thanks again.
Okay. See ya.